Hello and welcome one and all to the Games Monster podcast, the video game podcast by me, your host David Pstansky, as part of the Extreme Improv Extremed network of podcasts. So if you haven't done so already, quickly take a moment to smash that subscribe button wherever you are listening or watching this podcast. So if you go over to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Extreme Improv, and smash that subscribe button, that'll be awesome. If you're just listening to the audio version without the video, then of course just click the subscribe, and whichever platform you're on, iPhone, Spotify, Alexa, Google Podcast, the lot, it's all good. Today we're going to be getting into Resident Evil VIII Village, or Resident Evil Village. It's an interesting name, it's a clever name. I think I've spoken about this detail before. It's funny that the title of it is... Oh, sorry, I just need to adjust my chair. The title of it is Resident Evil Village, and obviously they're not really saying Resident Evil VIII Village like they would say Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, for example. They're just saying Resident Evil Village because the spelling of village, Village, has got everything in it for the VILL looking like the Roman numeral for 8. So they're just basically saying Resident Evil Village, but it is Resident Evil VIII Village. And wow, we've got this new trailer. I'm going to put on the trailer in the background, and you won't hear it, but you'll be able to hear my reaction to it. The graphics are incredible. The first thing we know is that it is coming out for the Xbox Series X, the Xbox Series S, of course, PlayStation 5, and they also confirmed it will be available for PS4 and Xbox One as well as PC, in addition to the next-gen consoles. My first worry from that is that the previous generation consoles, PS4 and Xbox One, will hold back what they could do in this. But I'm not particularly too worried, because I think there's probably not a huge deal in a Resident Evil game that's, you want claustrophobic environments, you don't want huge, expansive, open areas necessarily. At least that's never been the case of Resident Evil games before. So don't worry if it's going to be on the old gen, and if you have it for the old gen, then you will be able to upgrade to the new generation machines. Just looking at this trailer in the background, the graphics are unbelievable. They're so good. It takes everything that we saw in Resident Evil 4 and it just adds in more detail. It definitely looks like a continuation of... Did I say 4? Resident Evil 7, rather. Of Resident Evil 7. When I said it's not going to have the huge expanse area, I'm sure this will still feel claustrophobic, and they'd be able to mask loading times in various places. But obviously it is set in an expansive village, which I think they've said is going to be larger than the game world that you've had in previous places. But anyway, the trailer opens up, and you've got this... I don't know if she is the maiden, they speak about maiden later, but you get this very tall woman that you can't tell at first is a very tall woman. And it's interesting because it's a little bit like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory with the room that gets smaller, because you see her sat talking on the phone in front of a mirror on a seat, and everything is all to be seen as well, because she looks completely normal. But when you see her later in the trailer, she's ginormous. But anyway, maybe she grows, but her clothes grow with her, Incredible Hulk style. We see some shots of like a mansion, and it looks very reminiscent of the mansion in Resident Evil 1. The layout's a bit different. We see some scarecrows. We see some beings which probably are a bit witches. We see witches, we see werewolves in this, so they're definitely going into mythology. You see these gangly, creepy, skeleton-like zombie-ish things, which I'm sure aren't going to be actual zombies. But they are kind of like a halfway between a zombie and a villager from Resident Evil 7, I guess. I don't like when you've got these monsters, because they've got things which are like moths or bees or butterflies, which all buzz around and then become a person. I've never been a huge fan of the teleporting style monsters, because you can't really fight them, and it feels a bit unfair. You don't really feel like you've got a tactic against it. We also see shots that Chris Redfield's back. We already knew that from the previous trailer. When you see this village on where it shows the logo screen, you see the village behind it with this big castle, and it's like, where the hell is this place? Because surely there are places where people just must know this whole village or this whole town is messed up, like in Resident Evil 4 with the big castle and everything. But anyway, so we see some guy walking towards you, and he pulls his head up and he's got glasses on, and it looked like he's got like a big mallet over his shoulder. Now I'm sure he's a bad guy, but there might be a bit more to him than what they've yet revealed. He might be someone who's an ally at times, or maybe he'll be a little bit of an ally, but then you'll fight him. I'm not quite sure what to make of that character just yet. My thoughts on it being a first-person game like Resident Evil 7, I get why they did it. That obviously they went a very different direction with Resident Evil 7, and it revitalised the series, and it brought it back to prominence after 6 had obviously let people down, and then Revelations were saying, well, it's better than 6, but it's just kind of a rehash of Resident Evil 4 gameplay again. So they went in a new direction. Then obviously they've taken a step backwards to the Resident Evil 4 style gameplay to have Resident Evil 2 remake and Resident Evil 3 remake. And so to see Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 8 go back to 7, I understand why they did it. But once again, my initial gut reaction is, I think I kind of prefer the over-the-shoulder Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 5, and Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake version of the gameplay, and just being able to see the character. That's one of the things I think I've always enjoyed more in games anyway. But that said, with Resident Evil 7, I thought it was an incredible game. It really felt like a Resident Evil game, even though it was first person, and it felt more like a Resident Evil game, despite being first person, compared to the previous first person Resident Evil games, such as Resident Evil Survivor or Resident Evil Survivor 2. Resident Evil Dead Aim was third person, but then first person for combat. But anyway, so you then see on this trailer, you see Ethan walking around in a location where there's like lights, and there's a big castle in the background, and there's a scarecrow. Who knows, this scarecrow might actually come to life. I shouldn't be surprised. They might just be keeping that as a shock, so when you actually play it, you don't realise the scarecrows are going to suddenly hop off of their posts. You see Ethan going into what is basically the mansion of this game, I guess. So it looks like a castle or a mansion. And it's got like the big entrance hallway. I don't think, just looking at it, it looks a little bit more claustrophobic. It, to me, doesn't have that same quite grand scale as the original mansion. Or, as you saw it in Resident Evil Remake. But obviously the graphics on this are incredible. The level of detail is amazing. They announced that the game, I think, would be coming out on the 7th of May or early May 2021, which is not so long away now, so it's like 4 months away. So lots of time to get excited about it. They obviously announced that there would be the PS5 exclusive demo, which is available now. I do not have a PS5 yet, so unfortunately I'm out of luck on that. But I will definitely check out some gameplay that other people have done of it, just because I know there's no point waiting just to play the demo, because it's going to be a while before PS5s are easily available. But then there are these witches. So like I said, there are werewolves in this game. We see these witch-type characters who seem to turn into moths or butterflies, and there's like 3 of them. But then there's the tall woman with the hat, so like the Southern Belle hat on, and she is much larger, like more than head and shoulders above the other 3. And she's probably going to be this game's equivalent of the Nemesis, or Mr. Baker, can't remember his name, the father bad guy in Resident Evil 7. Excuse me. What's interesting is we see these skeleton guys, and they've actually got swords, which is just unreal. Excuse me, I'm going to have to grab a drink in a moment, but I'll try to last out. And then we see some werewolves, and we see some little werewolves, and then a giant werewolf. So it tells us that giants are definitely a thing in this. And this giant werewolf has got a giant hammer. So maybe it's that guy we saw earlier with the big hammer. He turns into a werewolf, and he's still got the hammer. But again, the hammer seems to have grown and be proportionally the same size to this werewolf creature as as it was to the guy with the glasses that I mentioned earlier. What was a little bit disappointing there is on the first reveal trailer, they really made the werewolf seem like, oh my god, this is Resident Evil with werewolves, but they seem to underplay the werewolves in this trailer, and the fact that they show one instantly with a much larger werewolf and then the smaller ones get blown up, it seemed to downplay the importance and the threat, I think, of the werewolves. But we'll see what they emerge to be later on. We also see that the item management system from Resident Evil 4 is back, and they say it's now got crafting involved. So obviously Resident Evil 3, which came out last year, had a lot of crafting involved with the different gunpowders and the things that you could get, and this is going to be incorporating that into it, which is fine, but it was never my favourite thing, because once you've upgraded your weapons, that whole gameplay element isn't really that important anymore. So it's only really important for when you first play the game. Later on, like on Resident Evil 4, I never bother with the crafting. If I've played the game through and upgraded all my weapons, then I'll play it again, and then the whole crafting element is completely gone. But it's good to see the item management where you can rotate items and fit them into your items. Your item bag is back, just because it adds strategy to the items you have with you, to what you can carry, what you can't carry. I assume this means that there won't be item boxes, and that we won't have item boxes, which I believe you did have in Resident Evil 7. They show that the merchant is back, and it's interesting that they say the merchant is back. So if this is meant to be in some way the same merchant, you're now seeing his face, which you didn't before, and he seems to have put on about £300 or £400, which is interesting. They also put on the idea, they put over the idea that you'll see him in different locations, and one of the locations they show him in actually has like a bust of a deer, like a taxidermy behind him, and it's got candles and paintings. So to me, the merchant in Resident Evil 4 never made 100% sense in terms of the game being realistic, because he kept going everywhere, he had all these weapons and everything, and he was always fine. So you always knew that, well, there's this other person that can survive around there, and there's another human, even though they made him a bit mysterious. But then in this, there's going to be some, ginormous guy, and he'll be going around everywhere and seemingly always okay, which takes away the panic and realism of it a little bit, but that doesn't really matter. I never really had a quibble with it in Resident Evil 4. But I do like that they are doing these callbacks with the merchant and the items, and I assume the upgrading of items in a similar way to Resident Evil 4, because again, it was one of the things that gave that game so much replayability, because you could upgrade the weapons, and then in the end, once you've really upgraded the weapons or got infinite rocket launchers in this and that, then you could just run through the game and absolutely just speed run it and have fun doing it and feel overpowered. Whereas Resident Evil 2 Remake, it didn't really have that, which came out a couple of years ago, and I don't think Resident Evil 7 had that. Now, the one thing that's a shame about Resident Evil 7 is it didn't make me feel the urgency of playing it over and over, but hopefully, just because, like I said, Resident Evil 2 didn't have that, you could get like an infinite rocket launcher and an infinite, like a Gatling gun, not a Gatling gun, or a machine gun or something, but it wasn't the same as upgrading your weapons in Resident Evil 2, and then Resident Evil 3 was a step closer, where you could complete challenges to earn money to get new weapons, which again, I don't think you upgraded your weapon, so it wasn't like the same weapon was now more powerful or necessarily held more ammo, but you could get like, oh, now I've got this extra weapon, now I've got this extra weapon, and some of them did very cool things like the fire knife and stuff like this, but that gave you a lot more sense of, right, I need to keep playing this game over and over to earn the money to upgrade my inventory. But anyway, let's just scroll back a tiny bit on this trailer, just because I've spoken about some of the things and skipped over some of the thoughts. You see these, again, they're like bees or wasps or something, flying around, and they go inside your skin, and you see them crawling under your skin. But to me, this is kind of like an unfair monster. I'm sure there might be some strategy, but it looks like no matter how much you shoot at one of these things, it's going to keep coming towards you. And when you see something that's just evaporating around you and reforming and teleporting, you don't feel like you can have the strategy of, right, I'm just going to run past it. It adds to the, oh, this is scary, but it's not like when you'd see a zombie or a hunter in Resident Evil 1 and think, right, how can I run around this? You know, can I stand here and fight it? Can I like keep dodging it? I'm sure there's ways where you can dodge and run and fight if you choose to with these evaporating witch ladies, but it's still one of these things where it feels a bit too supernatural. But like I said, this is really leaning into some of the mythological creatures, with werewolves, with witches, with like skeleton fighters with swords, a bit Jason and the Argonauts style stuff. So it looks incredible. This is definitely the game I'm looking forward to most this year. I don't even know what else is going to be coming out, but this is the game which I will be playing the day it releases. Of course, with Resident Evil 3 last year, it was a great game, and it had a lot of replayability in that it was short enough so that you could just run through it again and again and again if you wanted. I know some people were disappointed with that, but with this one it looks like it's going to be a much larger game, a much longer game. I don't know if they've said about how long it's actually going to take to get through on a first run through or an average run through, but I'm going to take a guess that this is probably going to be a 10 to 15 hour game. They also show off the trailer for Maiden, which is the Resident Evil 8 demo that you can get exclusively for PS5. So like I said again, I personally won't get a chance to play this in the immediate future because I don't have a PS5, but they did say that there will be demos released for the Xbox Series X, and probably the same one also available for the PlayStation 5, as well as the PS4 and Xbox One and PC later on in the spring before this releases. So I'm probably going to have to wait until then to be able to get my hands on a demo. But Maiden, it says that you don't get to play as Ethan, you play as some maiden, and you also can't defend yourself, you don't have weapons, and also they sort of put over the idea that you can actually just put up your arms to block and defend, which is a slight new thing, because in the past you'd always have it so that you could push back enemies, or you could use defense weapons such as a knife or like a grenade and stuff like this in Resident Evil Remake and Resident Evil 2 Remake. But just the idea of being able to do hand-to-hand combat was never a thing in Resident Evil game. In the Evil Within, obviously, they did have that, but you'd never just be able to punch. You'd always do it if you've got grabbed by a monster. You might be able to bash some buttons and then push a monster off, but you would never have it so that you could actually just do anything hand-to-hand, and it looks like they've taken a step into this direction. But that looks super exciting. Also on the 25th anniversary Resident Evil showcase, they showed off Reverse, or Reverse, and it's going to come free with Resident Evil 8, so even though they say it as if it's a different game, realistically this is just an extra game, a different part of the game, because you will get it free with Resident Evil Village. And what it is it's got stylized looks so that it kind of looks a bit more like a comic book. It gives me a little bit of the vibe of the Walking Dead game in terms of its graphics. And you'll be able to play as lots of different characters and be in locations from the last couple of Resident Evil games, like the remakes. And I'm sure that's where a lot of the assets for this have come from. Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Remake. And, Jack, that was the name of the dad. Jack Baker, I think. But anyway, so you see that Jack is a character in it. Whether you can play as Jack or not, I don't know. It looks like you may be able to play as Nemesis, or if not, Nemesis is definitely in it. Leon and Claire are in it, Jill is in it, I believe you see Chris Redfield, and I'm sure Carlos will be in it, and I'll see if I spot anyone else on the trailer just so I'm playing it. But it definitely looks like they're just using a chance to reuse the assets from Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. Probably Resident Evil 7 as well. but whether or not we'll get any locations from Resident Evil 1. If we do get locations from Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 0, people are going to be like, oh my god, we're going to get a Resident Evil 1 remake in the style of Resident Evil 2 remake, which would be the second time that Resident Evil 1 has been completely remade, because obviously the original game was from 96, like on the PS1. Then there was the 2002 GameCube remake. We got a HD remaster which tweaked things and played around with things from the GameCube game, but that wasn't an actual remake, it was just a HD upgrade. So if we were to get one that changes so that we no longer have the 2D static pre-rendered backgrounds and we have fully 3D environments, that would be cool. Obviously we've been down slight road of Dark Side Chronicles and Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, which retold some of these stories and remade these environments in 3D. But again, that was another example of a first-person Resident Evil game, as I mentioned earlier. I'm trying to see what other monsters are on this reverse. So it's showing it so quick that I'm not even able to quite pick it all up. But we definitely have Nemesis with his nose. We've got Chris Redfield looking like he does in Resident Evil 7. Claire Redfield. We've got Jack. We've got Leon, who they put... It's interesting, they've got Ada, which they show, and Hunk, which they show, and Jill, that they show. But just in terms of this artwork, which may just be an artwork they're showing now, or it may turn out to be box artwork, or the start screen for it, we see Leon S. Kennedy in the middle behind the logo. Now, he is just about the smallest character, but he's got front centre. But then we've got Jack behind him, which makes Jack really prominent in terms of being the villain here. More so than Nemesis, which is the other villain, which we see at the back, at the top, but still at the back, and he's facing off to one side. And it almost gives a sense that you might be able to play as Nemesis from what they showed in the trailer. Jill is shown largest. I guess that's perhaps because her game came out last year. Claire Redfield is off to the left. Ada's off to the right. Chris Redfield is slightly less prominent behind his sister. And then Hunk is down at the bottom on the right, which, yeah, doesn't really put him in the prominent position. But I'm sure it's just that you can choose all of these characters and probably more. Probably have Brad on here. Like I said, I'd be shocked if there wasn't Carlos. I doubt they'll have Sherry to be able to play as, unless it's older Sherry from Resident Evil 6. But yeah, this is the main things they showed off in this game, in this thing. They also showed, what is it? I forget even what game it was. There's, oh yeah, The Division. The Division 2, you can get some Resident Evil themed costumes for it. If you play The Division 2, then that's lovely, that's great. I haven't played that game, and I don't envisage that I will. Certainly not just to get these costumes. If they said that there were things in it where you perhaps have Nemesis chasing you, that might have sounded fun, but it looks like it's just cosmetic costumes. It says there'll be weapons and skins and stuff as well. And that's cool if you're a Resident Evil fan and also play The Division, but that's not necessarily for me. They show off the trailer for the Resident Evil Netflix thing again, and I truthfully didn't pay too much attention to that. But I'm sure it'll be very good. I can't even remember the name of it now, Resident Evil Damnation. That may have been one of the previous Resident Evil CGI movies. This one's called Infinite Darkness. I do believe all of the CGI movies actually are part of the canon. They actually count towards the story. And I haven't seen the most recent one. I can't remember if that's Damnation. Oh, Degeneration I think was the first one, and there may be Damnation, or there might not be a Damnation at all, and I may be making that up. But Resident Evil Infinite Darkness, I'm sure it will be good. We'll see how much it adds to the story, but with any of these things, I don't think it's really that essential to watch them to be able to keep enjoying the series of games. It'll be interesting as well just to see how much the story of Resident Evil 7 continues here, because clearly with Ethan as the main character, and from what they said previously, it sounds like they're going to wrap up Ethan's story. Always bothered me that you never saw what Ethan looked like, and that's again another problem with a first-person shooter, compounded rather by the fact that they chose to purposely not let you see what your character looks like, so that I don't feel that much closeness to that character, but in a sense it's cool that they are going to reinforce that character as a main part of the series. But from the sounds of it, I think on the last trailer they said something about his story ends here. And is it Ethan's story that ends? Is it Chris's story that ends? Maybe it's the merchant's story that ends. We'll find out. But I'd be very interested already, just with Chris Redfield 100% confirmed to be in this game, how much it's going to bring. Because when you play Resident Evil 7, it's only the last third of the game that starts really tying things into the previous games. And obviously, with Chris Redfield, spoiler warning, but sorry, if you're talking about Resident Evil 8, then events that happen in 7 may come up. Same with events of any of the previous ones. But with Chris Redfield appearing in Resident Evil 7 towards the end, it'll be interesting to see how prominent he now is in this rather than just a cameo. And will this do anything to further develop the story of the characters from the rest of the series? Will we get any other characters pop up? There's no reason that Leon should pop up or Claire should pop up. Claire could, just because of the connection to Chris, but it will just be interesting to see if this is just wrapping things up, or what they're going to do on this. Is it going to be somewhat standalone to wrap up what they started with Resident Evil 7? Or is there going to be some way where we're like, oh my god, when is Resident Evil 9 coming out? I kind of feel that, even though it may be good to tease that there's more to come and give a definite sense that we're going to get more from this specific branch of the Resident Evil story, that they probably won't. Just because, and I won't go into it too much, partly because I haven't retained and been able to say all of what came out, but there was that leak about Resident Evil games a month or two back, and it suggested that there was, without saying what they were, a lot of Resident Evil games coming out. The one I will mention is that they're talking about there being a Resident Evil 4 remake, and if that is true, then it's probable that it'll go Resident Evil Village this year, Resident Evil 4 remake next year, and then maybe Resident Evil 9 the year after. Not that I'm even sure that was part of the leak, but perhaps this is the rhythm they're going to do, where there'll be a new game in the series, then a remake, then a new game, then a remake. We may get the Resident Evil Code Veronica remake at some point, Resident Evil 0 remake, or Resident Evil 1 remake, if you know what I mean. So anyway, this is super exciting. They said that if you pre-order Resident Evil 8 Village, then you get a bunch of bonus things. There was like the digital deluxe version. I'll see if I can quickly scroll back and find what they said you get with this thing. Let's see, can I find it? Potentially, yeah, there we go. So if you get the Resident Evil... Now it's not going to load. If you get the Resident Evil 8 digital deluxe version, I'm sure you get some extra weapons that you can use. I really can't, it's not bringing it up for me to see, which is a pain. Here we go. So you get, let's see if I can make this full screen to be able to read it, the Albert's weapon thing. It says save device. Now what is that going to be? And it says save room music, and it's interesting. It says save room music and it shows a typewriter, and then it says save device and it shows the tape recorder. Now obviously the tape recorder came from Resident Evil 7. The typewriter, which says when it says save room music, comes from previous games in the series before Resident Evil 7. In fact, I think up to Resident Evil 4. And then I think from Resident Evil 5 onwards, I'm correct in saying they went for more like save at chapters rather than anything else. Maybe you could save in Resident Evil 5, haven't played it in a while. But certainly they made it so you could save at tape recorders in Resident Evil 7. And it says, I think it says max difficulty, which again is cool. Probably not what I will go for. With Resident Evil 3 remake, I was trying to get like the platinum, everything, and get all of the bonus items available, so I did have to beat it on the hardest difficulty level, which, to be honest, with the final boss in particular, I didn't find fun. It took me an hour or more to beat the final boss on the hardest difficulty level of Resident Evil 3, and I didn't like that they made it so that you almost had to do that to unlock everything, because it would just mean that I just don't bother with certain games. It says Mr. Everywhere, which is that little bobblehead which they've been playing with, things like that in the last couple of games. I don't really know in what sense you get that, but it says Deluxe Edition Trauma Pack, and it says, Found footage Resident Evil 7 filter, so it just will change what the graphics look like for a filter on it. The tragedy of Ethan Winters, can't remember what they said that is. I don't think it's super important to bring it up. Then they said about collector's edition, which I won't be getting, just because it's probably going to cost £80 or £100 or something. You get it in a steel book case. You get Trauma Pack product code. Can't remember what so that's probably the Trauma Pack. Is that what you? Yeah, that's the digital deluxe edition. It looks like some big map or something. It says a poster, and it says a box. So it looks like you'll get like a little. It looks like a luggage case, and I don't know if that's what the item boxes look like in Resident Evil 7, or if that's perhaps what the item boxes may look like in this. And it'd be interesting because obviously, item boxes. I think I'm right in saying that you couldn't have, unless I'm absolutely screwing my brain up now. You had like your big inventory, which you could expand in Resident Evil 4, but you then didn't have an item box as well. So, but I think you did have an item box in Resident Evil 7. It says an art book, which again, I'm sure will be quite nice, but I don't care about. Resident Evil, on PlayStation 5, you'll be able to get a miniature soundtrack, which is cool if you want to pre-order it there, but again, to me, that isn't really worth it. I don't feel gutted that I don't have a PS5 if I was to get the Xbox edition. It says that you'll get a copy of Resident Evil 7 if you get Resident Evil 8, and that's cool. If it means that you get it for the Xbox Series X or you get it for the PS5, that might be quite cool, except for if there's not any upgrade to it and it's just that you've got the PS4 equivalent version which runs on the PS5. I already have Resident Evil 7 for the PS4, and it is available on Game Pass on the Xbox, and I've got it on Steam because you can get it super cheap on Steam. But I guess if you've never played Resident Evil 7, and perhaps over the last couple of years you'd played Resident Evil 2 Remake and 3 Remake, this will give you the way to get into Resident Evil 7. I think you may be able to get that pretty soon. Yeah, it says whilst you wait for Resident Evil Village, you will get Resident Evil 7. It also says about pre-order bonus, Mr. Raccoon weapon charm. I don't know if that just improves your weapon. Survival resource pack, and it looks like you've got some extra bullets, some shotgun shells, and I don't know what that, if that's a syringe or something that you get with it. It looks like a big pick, and it's a lock pick, of course, and then like a first aid spray or something. And it says that it will help you in the early stages of the game, so I'm sure it's just that you've got a few bonus items that perhaps once you use, they're gone forever, or maybe you've got them so that when you start a game, you've always got these the first time you play, and that you won't get it later if you buy the game later. And then, of course, the PlayStation Store digital pre-order bonus, which is Village Resident Evil soundtrack, and it says it's a mini soundtrack. So there you go, guys. That's my thoughts on the showcase of Resident Evil, with the Reverse, the Netflix program, the Netflix movie, and of course the Resident Evil Village trailer and demo that's going to be out. Do listen to the Games Monster podcast on Extreme Improv's channels, whether it's the Extreme Improv Facebook page, whether it's the Extreme Improv YouTube channel, if you're downloading and listening to this on a podcast app, if you're listening it to on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google, wherever, do take a moment to hit the subscribe. If you enjoy this, tell people about it. This is, for me, a step towards doing lots more content like this. There are going to be videos coming up in terms of gaming content in the near future, and there's going to be lots and lots more stuff coming up. That's my commitment for 2021, that I'm going to really lean into this a lot more. Do go over to our website, and the website's going to be on our Facebook page, and I'll just say it like that because there's a surprise coming up soon. And so it's facebook.com/Extreme Improv. You'll be able to find out all about what we've got coming up on our YouTube channel and our website, and so much more in the near future. So with that, my name is David Postansky, and smash that subscribe button on youtube.com/Extreme Improv. And until next time, stay safe, enjoy Resident Evil, and always stay extreme.